My name is Delilah, 33 years old, living in a quiet little town in southern Kentucky, where folks greet each other with a glance, but rarely stop if someone collapses by the roadside. That day the cold cut through like glass. I had just stepped out of the grocery store when I saw the elderly woman trembling under a leafless tree, her thin coat soaked with rain. I walked over and gently placed my hand on her shoulder, just as my mother appeared, yanked my arm away in front of everyone and slapped me across the face. She screamed, "Clinging to garbage again, are you?" I stood frozen. But the old woman looked up at me and smiled. She said, "Tomorrow, someone will knock on your door. What would you do if your kindness was crushed by the very people who raised you? If you've ever been misunderstood for choosing compassion over coldness, leave a comment. Tap like if you believe kindness holds its own kind of power. And don't forget to subscribe because the story behind that slap was only just beginning. I still remember every detail of that parent-teacher meeting back in 11th grade, when my art teacher pulled my mom aside, her eyes glowing. "Mrs. Patricia, your daughter has a gift. I've never seen a student handle materials and color this intuitively." My mother gave a faint, half-hearted smile, her hand gripping the handle of her worn brown leather purse. On the way home she said nothing. But the moment we stepped inside the house she turned, her eyes ice cold. "Art? You think drawing a few pictures will feed anyone? Only freeloaders dream like that." I didn't argue. I never did. Every time I tried to speak up, my resistance dissolved into the cold brick walls of the house I was born in. My mother was the kind of woman who took offense at a sideways glance. And my father? He mostly stayed silent, hidden behind his newspaper, letting life drift by like static on a broken radio. I had an older sister, Heather. 4 years ahead of me. Hair always sleek, nails perfectly trimmed. Heather studied law, earned a full-ride scholarship, graduated with honors from Boston University. My parents always spoke of her with a pride I never once heard directed at me. "Watch Heather. She knows what she wants, keeps her figure, acts properly. Always gloomy. Soft as lukewarm water." When I got into college I chose visual arts. It was the only decision I ever made on my own. I was accepted into the State Art Academy with a 70% scholarship, and by the end of my first year I was top of the class. I stayed up all night sketching, building models from discarded scraps, designing spaces out of things most people threw away. My professor nominated me for a student exchange program in Italy. I was about to sign the papers when my mother called, at 3 in the morning. Her voice hit like a nail in the spine. "If you leave, don't come back. I don't raise dreamers. Don't turn this house into a trash heap." I folded the papers and tucked them into the bottom drawer of my dorm room. I dropped out the next semester. I told my friends I couldn't afford tuition, but the truth was, I didn't have the strength to keep fighting my family. I moved back home. Took the small attic room. Since then I worked freelance online, designing for craft shops, little bookstores, nameless projects with no fanfare. I got paid through PayPal, lived frugally, asked for nothing. Every time a client praised my work I just smiled at the screen and shut the laptop, because there was no one at home to tell. My mother called me the shadow. Once during dinner she said it flat out. "Heather's the light. Just her shadow. Always looking down. Always timid. No one notices the shadow, Delilah." I remember lowering my head toward my plate of steamed greens, chewing slowly like I could swallow the tears with the food. Heather gave a small dry chuckle. She didn't say a word, but her eyes slid past me like I really wasn't there. There was one time I dared ask my mother something. It was after her back gave out and I skipped a client meeting to drive her to the hospital. On the way home she didn't thank me. I drove in silence. After a few minutes I asked, "Do you ever think I'm good enough?" She said nothing. Then she laughed, a bitter, mocking kind of laugh that still stings when I remember it. "You'll be good enough when you stop playing the victim and get a real job. Don't wait for pity." I said nothing more. I learned to live quietly, like even my breath needed permission. I cooked, cleaned, paid utilities on time with whatever I earned. My mother never asked what I did, only reminded me when a bill was short or the internet slowed down. I lived in that house like a tenant with no lease. No one called me sweetheart. No one waited for me to come home. I got used to it. I stopped expecting. I became the woman who smiled when interrupted, gave up her seat on the bus, looked away when spotting someone she knew at the grocery store. The kind of woman everyone's seen, but no one remembers. And in a world where gentleness is mistaken for weakness, I existed like a blank space between bold printed lines. But I still helped that woman. Not because I wanted recognition. Not because I thought I was better. But because I knew, no, because I had lived too long knowing what it felt like to be left behind. And in that moment, watching her shiver in the rain, I just wanted someone, anyone, not to be abandoned. What I didn't expect was that the slap that followed would be the beginning of everything. And I certainly didn't expect that the trembling woman in the rain had been watching me for a long time. The next morning, I was wiping down the kitchen counter when I heard a sudden, synchronized screeching of brakes outside the window. Heavy. Nothing like any neighbor's car. I pulled the curtain back slightly. My heart skipped a beat. 7 sleek black SUVs lined up in front of our house, engines silenced almost in unison. Men in suits stepped out of each vehicle, silent, unreadable. It looked like a scene from some late-night political drama. Marcus across the street even stopped mowing, pulled off his headphones, squinting toward our porch. The front door burst open. My mother rushed out in her striped beige robe, the sash still loose, hair hastily pinned. "What is going on?" she barked at me like I had summoned a presidential security team. Heather came clacking down the stairs in heels. From the center SUV, the door opened slowly. A woman stepped out. Mid-60s. Silver hair neatly tied back. Long smoky blue coat. A silk scarf wrapped around her wrist. Her eyes swept across the yard and landed on me, as if she already knew exactly who I was. "Miss Delilah Foster?" she asked, her voice deep, clear. I nodded, throat dry. She approached and extended her hand. "I'm Evelyn Whitmore. I believe you remember me, or at least an older version of me." I froze. Blinked hard. It was her. The old woman. But not the frail, shivering figure from yesterday. Now she stood tall, elegant, composed, entirely in control. "I'd like to invite you to come with me for 1 hour if you're willing." She spoke gently, then turned to a man behind her, likely her assistant, and gave a subtle nod. My mother stormed forward, blocking her path. "Who are you? What do you want from my daughter? If this is some scam..." Evelyn didn't flinch. "Mrs. Patricia, I'm not here to take. I'm here to offer. I don't scam anyone, I observe." He turned back to me. "You're welcome to change clothes first if you like." Heather had now stepped out onto the porch, confused. "Delilah, what's happening? Do you know this woman?" I didn't answer. My hands were trembling, not from fear but something else. I saw neighbors gathering along the curb, whispering. I swallowed hard, stepped past my mother without a word, and went back inside for my coat. I wasn't sure why I said yes. Maybe it was the look in Evelyn's eyes, one that didn't demand or pity but simply said, "I see you. I choose you." The SUV glided down the narrow road out of town. No one spoke until the last bend. "Do you know who I am?" Evelyn asked, gently stroking the seam of her caramel leather gloves. "I guess. Not exactly a homeless person," I replied softly. She let out a soft laugh, not arrogant, but more like someone who had waited a long time to speak honestly. "I'm Evelyn Whitmore. My family runs the Whitmore Foundation, a cultural and social trust that has funded hundreds of art projects across the United States. But I'm not telling you this to boast. I'm telling you because I'm looking for someone to carry it on." I turned to her, confused. "Why me?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Yesterday I did something simple. I disguised myself and walked through towns. I've done this many times over the past 30 years. All I wanted was to see if there were still places where kindness didn't come with conditions. You didn't know who I was. You didn't film it. You didn't ask for anything. You just gave me your coat and sat quietly beside me." She turned, her eyes looking straight ahead. "That's the kind of person I need to carry on a very special project." I sat up straighter, trying to make sense of what was happening. "What project?" I asked. She pulled a small leather envelope from her coat pocket and placed it gently on my lap. "I want to revive an old art sanctuary. It used to be a refuge for women, children, people dismissed by society. But I don't want a business executive running it. I want someone who's been overlooked. Someone who knows what it means to be invisible." I held the envelope but didn't open it. Why not choose Heather? My sister's a lawyer trained. She tried to apply to Whitmore last year. She didn't look surprised. I've met Heather. She's very competent. But when I posed as a lost woman during a seminar she attended, she looked at me like I was trash stuck to the carpet. You, on the other hand, you bent down even while you were soaked. I bit my lip. My chest tightened. This isn't a job offer, she continued. This is the beginning of a test. If you agree, I'll take you somewhere, and for 30 days, you'll decide whether you're ready to step out of the shadows. I looked out the window. The trees along the road had begun to turn a coppery hue. And if I'm not? I asked. Evelyn didn't turn. Then you'll return to that attic room where no one ever truly listened to you. And I'll keep searching, but honestly, I hope it doesn't come to that. The SUV took me down leaf-strewn dirt roads, flanked by pine trees that stood silent, like they'd been asleep for seasons. No one spoke for the rest of the drive. I could only hear the soft crunch of gravel beneath the tires, and my own quiet heartbeat thudding in my chest. When the vehicle came to a stop, I stepped out into a wide open space surrounded by trees and the soft glow of late afternoon light. Before me stood a 2-story building made of dark wood, its gray shingled roof draped in moss, tall windows with frosted glass, and a few doors left slightly ajar as if waiting for something, or someone, to return. The garden surrounding it was wild, vines creeping onto the path. But despite the overgrowth, the air didn't feel cold. Something in the silence told me not to speak, as if this place belonged only to those willing to listen. Evelyn stood beside me, slipped off her leather gloves and tucked them into her coat pocket. We call this place Haven Grove, she said. Back then it was a sanctuary for women who had nowhere else to go. Victims of violence. Widows. Dropouts. Those cast aside simply for being different than what society expected. But here they were called by their real names. And given a chance to start over. I followed her slowly through an old wooden gate, its iron frame curled into faded floral patterns, now rusted with time. Along the narrow stone path, I noticed remnants of past lives. A broken folding chair, a cracked ceramic jar with sea blue paint still clinging to its rim, shards of pottery half buried in dirt. Have you ever heard of a place where pain is allowed to exist? Evelyn asked, her hand resting gently on the wooden doorframe. Where no one has to pretend to be strong. Where people don't smile out of obligation, but cry because they're finally allowed to. I looked at her. My eyes burned, but I nodded. She pushed the door open. The hinges creaked like a deep sigh. Inside, the space was dusty but not decayed. Empty picture frames hung quietly on the walls. A long wooden table draped in faded linen, floorboards slightly cracked, and warm yellow light poured through the skylight like liquid gold. I've been watching you for a long time, Delilah, Evelyn said as we stepped into the main room. Not through social media, you're not on there. I read your anonymous articles, the local art bulletins, the sketches you submitted to community foundations under other names. The blueprints you posted with no credit. And I realized, someone was trying to say something, but kept being forced to whisper. I didn't know what to say. My fingers brushed the edge of the table, feeling the thick layer of dust like a sheet of memories. Evelyn walked over to a wooden bookshelf against the wall and pulled out an old tin box. Inside was a stack of paper, copies of my work I thought no one had remembered. I recognized one of them, a sketch of an exhibition space for the hearing impaired that I had submitted 3 years ago. Never got a reply. You left traces in places most people never bother to glance at, Evelyn said gently. But I saw them. And what I want to know is, do you have the courage to step out of the dark? I stayed quiet for a long time. I heard the wind rustle outside the window, my heart beat so loud I wondered if she could feel it too. And what if I said I've never done anything grand? I whispered. I've just existed. Evelyn placed her hand on my shoulder. For the first time since we'd reunited, I felt warmth in her touch. Then let me give you a chance to turn surviving into something that helps others live. We walked down the hallway to the second floor. The wallpaper was cracked, peeling in some corners, but the light from the small windows made everything feel tender, not bleak. She opened a door at the very end of the hall. Your room, she said. Fresh linens, a notebook, a few drawing tools on the desk. No internet. No TV. 1 month, Delilah. Stay here. No calling home, no proving anything. Just let this place become yours. I stepped inside. A small room with wooden floors, a writing desk by the window topped with a jar of dried flowers. In the corner, an easel with blank canvas leaned gently against the wall. On the bed was a folded gray wool blanket, simple, clean. Evelyn stood at the threshold. 1 month. If you leave early, no one will blame you. But if you stay, everything begins. I turned to her, said nothing, just gave a slight nod. She smiled, then quietly closed the door. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hand gliding across the fabric. There were no sounds, just the wind slipping through the trees and the soft light catching the floating dust in the air. I stayed there for a long time. Then opened the notebook on the desk and picked up the pencil. I didn't think. The pencil touched the paper, and from that point the first line appeared, light as breath. On the 3rd day after moving to Haven Grove, I woke up to the sound of birdsong mixed with the wind rustling through the old trees outside the window. No phone ringing. No mother calling me down to prepare breakfast. No one telling me what I should or shouldn't do. Just me, the room, and the sound of a world I once believed only existed in paintings. I walked down the stairs without carrying guilt. I stepped barefoot onto the cool wooden floor, flung open the back door to the garden, and stood there for a long while, letting the sunlight soak through my skin and into my breath. I didn't know why I wasn't crying. Maybe tears weren't necessary in a place where no one demanded me to be strong. I began cleaning one room at a time. Leftover sketch papers, forgotten frames, dusty chairs and tables as if waiting for someone's hand to wake them. In a small attic room, the light was so dim I had to use a flashlight. That's where I discovered an old wooden box pushed deep under a wardrobe. I pulled it out and caught the scent of rotting wood mixed with a faint trace of faded lavender. Inside were yellowed envelopes, notebooks, a few black and white photographs. I gently flipped through them. One letter, written in shaky handwriting full of emotion, caught my eye. I planned to end it all in this very room. But the brush was still in my hand. And I painted. I painted my daughter when she first learned to smile. I painted my mother's hands, the ones that used to catch mine every time I fell. And I didn't jump. I kept going. Not because I was strong, but because someone once told me, feeling pain is proof that you're still alive. So paint if you can still breathe. Paint if you can't yet name the sorrow. I sat in silence, I don't know for how long. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, listening to the words sparking something inside me. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper, laid it on my knees and sketched her face, the woman who wrote the letter, from my imagination. Her eyes were closed, but her lips curled into the faintest smile, as if she knew I was here, continuing what she hadn't finished. In the days that followed, I started cleaning seriously. I took down old curtains, wiped each glass pane with vinegar and warm water, repainted the window frames in soft gray white. I marked cracks on the walls with pencil, noting every material I'd need. I patched canvas cloths, nailed up picture hooks, and wiped down chairs and tables as if every item here had something to say, just waiting for someone patient enough to listen. While searching for tools in the old storage room near the kitchen, I accidentally knocked over a termite-eaten wooden cabinet, sending a stack of files tumbling out. The documents were stored in worn brown folders with frayed corners. I bent down to pick them up and a small photo slipped out, landing face down. I picked it up. When I turned it over, my hand froze. It was my mother, Patricia Foster, but a version I'd never seen before. She looked nearly 30 years younger, hair long, eyes sunken, frail, wearing an oversized sweater. In the corner of the photo, written in blue ink, Session number 7, 3rd week. I opened the folder, heart pounding. Inside were hospital admission forms, personal therapy schedules, descriptions of creative therapy, all bearing the name Patricia Foster, signed with a shaky hand on the final page. I couldn't believe it. The house where I was once called weak, where my mother preached strength and logic above all. It turned out she too had stood on the edge. She had once lived in these very rooms, walked those old hallways, sat on those cold wooden benches, just like I had. I set the file on the table. My throat was dry. For all those years she never said a word. She had never let slip even a hint beyond tight control, sharp words, and a pride so brittle it shattered at the sound of a sigh. I remembered one time when I got a low grade on a class presentation, I told her I'd been so anxious I hadn't slept for 3 nights. She scoffed and said, "Always blaming emotions. The weaker you are, the more excuses you make." But now I see she didn't hate fragility. She hated seeing it in herself. And I was the mirror she kept trying to shatter. I sat still, my hands clenched in my lap. I wasn't angry at her. Not anymore. I just felt compassion. A quiet sorrow with no place to spill, but also no need to scream. That night, I turned on the small light in the art room and pulled out a fresh canvas. I began with a smudge of red in one corner, then brushed over it with soft blue. I didn't name the painting. I just let it spill like water. When I stepped back, the image showed two women sitting by a window, one with silver hair, one with long black hair, both gazing at the sun setting behind the pine trees. They weren't speaking, but both were still there. And that, to me, was a beginning. I found the letter on Saturday afternoon, inside a small box wrapped in coarse fabric, hidden in the double drawer of the cabinet by the wall, the one I'd always thought held only old paint jars. The paper had browned, its corners worn smooth as if it had been handled countless times before being hidden away for good. The handwriting was slanted, slow, trembling near the end. I read each word carefully, eyes fixed on the page. Day 12 at Haven Grove. I haven't told anyone about it. Not because I'm strong, but because I'm terrified of the look of pity. I lost my first child at 29. Not in an accident. Not to illness. But because I couldn't bring myself to love a child when I was still trapped in a shell with no name. I believed I would never be worthy of being a mother. Every time I looked in the mirror, I only saw a twisted copy of my own mother, cold, needing to control everything just to hide the fear. I once tried to slit my wrist in the bathroom while my husband was out buying diapers. But the blood didn't flow like I expected. Just a thin red line like a warning. People say motherhood is instinct. But I've never felt that. I only felt lost. I folded the letter, hands shaking as if I were holding a blade. I didn't cry. Not a single tear fell. Just a numbing chill crawling down my spine and into the tips of my fingers. I went outside, walked around the garden, my steps wandering through the scent of damp leaves and the golden afternoon light casting long shadows on the ground. My mother, the woman who always scolded me for being weak, sentimental, useless, had once struggled through nights alone trying to survive. I remembered her eyes whenever I talked about art, about the gallery shows I dreamed of, about my wish to open a community art space for low-income families. She would always frown, her voice even and cold. Instead of painting, why don't you learn how to live realistically? Now I understand, maybe she didn't hate painting. She hated anything that reminded her she once dreamed. That afternoon, as I was wiping the glass in the main room, Evelyn appeared, quietly as she always did. She was holding a bundle of dried lavender, its scent gentle and rich, just like her presence. "You found it, didn't you?" Evelyn asked without even looking at me. I set down the cloth. "My mother's letter." She nodded and placed the bouquet in a glass vase on the table. "Patricia came here that fall. She didn't say much. But I still remember that first morning she sat on the porch holding a cup of tea, staring into the woods without blinking. Just like you did a few days ago." I looked at her, my voice barely audible. "Why did my mother never tell me?" "Because she never forgave herself," Evelyn said, then pulled out a chair and sat down, smoothing her skirt. "And when people can't forgive themselves, they try to control others as a way to survive." I went quiet. The air in the room grew heavy. The late sunlight stretched across the wall in thick honey-colored stripes. I sat opposite Evelyn, my hands clasped together. "I understand why she was the way she was," I said. "But I still haven't forgiven her." Evelyn nodded slightly, her eyes narrowing in the light. "Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. You don't owe your mother that. But you owe yourself the chance not to become a copy of that same pain." She stood, walked to the large cabinet by the wall, and pulled out a thick folder bound with a gray cloth ribbon. "I've thought about this long enough," Evelyn said, handing me the file. "I want you to take over full management of Haven Grove. No board approvals, no financial red tape. Just one condition: you must keep this place true to its original spirit. A refuge for those who once believed they had nothing left to hold on to." I stared at her in shock. "You trust me that much?" Evelyn smiled. "Not because you're ready, but because you're brave enough to live honestly even if you're still afraid. That's rare, Delilah. I used to hope Heather, your sister, would take over. But she's strong because she fears weakness, unlike you. You're strong because you dare to admit you've been weak." I opened the folder. Inside were renovation sketches, lists of potential grants, notes on Haven Grove's past relationships with community art organizations. Everything was meticulously organized with handwritten annotations on every page. So, I'll be the one running this place? I asked, my voice tightening. Evelyn nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder as light as a touch that left no trace. You don't have to be like anyone else. Just be yourself, fully. And if one day you feel strong enough, tell your mother about the room where you found that letter. So she'll know, the past isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to teach us how to rise from it. I looked at her. I didn't nod or speak. I just let the tears fall onto my hands, slowly and silently. But inside me, something began to stir, like a tree gently leaning into the first breeze after being forgotten for far too long. News of the sanctuary for the silenced started spreading in the 4th week after I officially took over. It began with a small article in the local paper's community section, along with a few photos of trial art therapy sessions I'd hosted with some women in the area. But just 2 days later, a reporter from the state television channel called, asking for an interview. They said an older woman, who remained unnamed, had submitted the proposal and art portfolio under my name with a short note. She doesn't just create art. She heals. The interview was held in the garden behind the main house. I wore a linen shirt, simple jeans, my hands still streaked with paint as I spoke. The camera crew didn't overcorrect the lighting. The reporter said they preferred to keep the golden evening tones untouched. I remember saying, I don't think I'm opening a center. I'm just opening a door that's been shut on all of us at least once. I didn't think much of it afterward. Until the phone in the office began ringing non-stop. One reporter. Then 2 people from a nonprofit organization. Then emails started flooding in, not just from strangers but from major city media outlets. I realized this had spread more than I thought when Evelyn called that late afternoon. They've started contacting the Whitmore Foundation, she said, her voice calm but slightly subdued. And of course, your family too. I sat still, my eyes fixed on the window where sunlight was slipping off the ground. I guess they're not thrilled, I murmured. They're confused. And when people don't understand something, they start getting angry. Less than 3 days later, my family's car pulled up in front of Haven Grove. I saw it through the door camera. Heather in a business dress, lips painted bold red like she'd just left a tense meeting, my mother in a beige blazer, arms crossed, and my father beside her holding an old baseball cap. Their expressions weren't joyful. There was only the scent of demands and reproach lingering at the gate. I didn't open the gate right away. I walked around the side path and stepped out through the small wooden gate draped in ivy. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Hi, Heather, I said, my voice not loud, but clear enough not to be swept away by the wind. Heather stepped forward. What are you doing, Delilah? The press is calling you the executive director of a community redevelopment project under the Whitmore name. You think that doesn't affect anyone? I looked at my sister, my gaze sharp and cold like a freshly sharpened pencil blade. Affect who, Heather? I'm working. I haven't taken anything from anyone. I'm not claiming to speak for anyone. My mother cut in, her voice piercing as if afraid of being ignored. You didn't say a word to me. Do you know the media called our house? They're asking about your childhood, about my illness, about everything they have no right to know. I swallowed the first answer that came to mind. Then took a deep breath. They're only asking because you always hid everything, I replied. If you'd ever said you'd been hurt or weak or needed help, maybe I wouldn't have lived so many years thinking I was a stain. My father, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Delilah. Family is family. No matter what, you doing this has affected your mother. Affected? I raised an eyebrow. Being forced to stay silent about your pain is being affected. What I'm doing is just living. I'm rebuilding a broken home, starting from the foundation. Heather frowned. The legal assistant role you're about to be offered? That's something I've worked toward for 3 years. You knew that, right? I nodded slightly. You once wanted it. But I never asked for it. Evelyn gave it to me because she saw I was a good fit. Not because of grades. Because I don't turn away when someone needs help. I saw my mother's hand tighten around her purse strap. You're airing our dirty laundry, Delilah. What happens in a home isn't the world's business. I didn't talk about our home, I said slowly. I talked about the things people usually hide. about how someone can still rise after being cast aside. And if someone hears their own story in that, maybe it's because they're the one who needs to be seen. Silence settled. Heather turned her face away, eyes reddening. My mother whispered almost inaudibly, "So, you don't need us anymore." I looked at her for a long time. In that moment I saw a woman no longer angry, just drained. But I couldn't pull her out of a pit she built herself from silence and control. "I don't need approval anymore," I said gently as breath. "I just need peace." I turned and walked slowly down the stone path leading into the back garden. I don't know how long I stood behind that wooden gate after the encounter. The wind rustled through the trees, playing a wordless melody echoing from years long past. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. There was just a feeling, wide and light, spreading through my chest as if I had taken my first full breath in years. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the State Department of Cultural Affairs. A warm-voiced woman informed me that I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the annual Arts and Community Conference in the state capital. She said they wanted to hear about the sanctuary for the silenced model, and more importantly, they wanted to hear my story. At first, I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to avoid public attention. But that evening, Evelyn simply placed a hand lightly on my desk and said, "Not everyone is given the chance to turn what they've endured into something that lights the way for others." The speech took place in a glass-domed auditorium, where sunlight streamed through the high-ceiling panes like a dream being poured down. I wore a charcoal gray linen dress, round neckline, nothing fancy, nothing loud. Standing behind the polished wooden podium, I rested both hands down, took a deep breath, and began. "My name is Delilah Foster. I used to be a shadow." I spoke of that winter morning, the old woman I helped with her coat, the look in my mother's eyes when she slapped me in the street. I didn't amplify the pain as an indictment. I told it like a piece of life. When I said, "Kindness isn't weakness. It's a revolution in slow motion," I saw an older woman in the front row squeeze the hand of the young girl beside her, tears brimming in her eyes. The speech was recorded and uploaded to the conference's official page that evening. Evelyn told me I should rest, but I stayed up all night. Not out of nerves, but because I couldn't quite believe that my voice, once dismissed as too soft, too quiet, was now being taken so seriously. The next morning, Evelyn invited me to breakfast at her private guest house, a place I had only entered once the day I arrived at Haven Ridge. She waited with 2 cups of chamomile tea and an envelope on the table. "These are the documents transferring full ownership of Haven Ridge," she said as gently as a morning greeting. My eyes widened. "Transferred to who?" "To you," she replied. "I wrote a will, but I don't think we need to wait for death to do the right thing. You didn't just preserve the spirit of this place. You brought it back to life." I was speechless. My fingertips trembled slightly as I touched the sealed envelope, as if I were holding a dream I had once been denied. "And one more thing," Evelyn said, handing me another folder. "We're launching the Whitmore Scholarship Fund, dedicated to girls who've been victims of abuse, violence, or abandonment. The scholarship will support therapeutic arts programs and fully sponsor those with talent but no opportunity." I clenched my hands softly. My eyes burned, not from pain but because the future had a clear shape. That afternoon, as I passed by the administration office, Evelyn's assistant, Olivia, called me over. "Delilah, someone sent you a video link and some investigative notes. It's from a journalist named Grace." I opened the email on the office desktop. It was a video clip, the original footage of the moment I was slapped outside the supermarket that winter. But what stunned me wasn't the image, it was the name of the sender. Madison Foster, my niece. Madison is Heather's daughter, 14 years old, quiet, bright, and always distant. I remember the last time I saw her, during a chaotic Christmas dinner when Heather scolded her for not putting down her phone. I never knew Madison looked at me with admiration. I didn't know she had quietly recorded that moment, not to hurt anyone, but to preserve something she believed was right. I called Grace, the investigative reporter. She confirmed Madison had sent the clip along with a message, "I don't know how to help Aunt Delilah, but I want others to see what I saw." I left my desk and walked out to the garden, where the lavender had just begun to bud after a long winter. I stood in the gentle scent, holding the notebook I had carried since the first day I arrived. On the final page I had written in my own hand, "I'm not a miracle. but I've chosen not to stay silent anymore. Just then I heard footsteps behind me. Evelyn didn't need to say a word. She simply stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my back. In the golden glow of the afternoon, no one smiled, no one cried. But I knew then, what I had done, even if it felt small, had created a circle wider than I ever imagined. A circle that was still expanding each day. The official opening night of Haven Ridge took place on a spring evening, when the air was just soft enough. The late-blooming daffodils still held a trace of fragrance in the back garden, and hand-strung lights twinkled in the trees like tiny stars lowered close to the earth. I stood behind the tall glass doors looking out at the courtyard, where the first guest had begun to arrive, footsteps light against the newly laid stone path. I expected nothing. No reunion, no words of blessing from family. When I sent the invitations, I included my mother and Heather like any other guests. No extra words, no explanations. But I understood. Some people don't say no aloud, they say it with silence. And this time I wouldn't beg for their presence. When the clock struck 7 p.m., I stepped onto the wooden stage set up in the garden. Beneath the warm golden lights, I saw familiar faces. Women who had walked with me through the journey of reviving this place. There was Clara, the widowed potter who had kept to herself for 2 decades. There was Ava, who once panicked if someone touched her hand, now running the print studio. There was Mia, a single mother who had once been too depressed to look in the mirror, now teaching dance to children in the community. I stood there, microphone in hand, no script, no notes. Not long ago, I began, I thought I had nothing to offer the world, except silence. I glanced around, meeting eyes that were open, listening, not judging. I grew up in a house where speaking up felt like a crime. Where kindness was treated as weakness. Where I believed I had to ask for permission just to exist. A quiet inhale rose from the front row. I continued slowly. Today, I'm not here to tell a story about resilience. I don't think I'm stronger than anyone else. I've just grown tired of running from myself. And once I stopped running, I saw so many others doing the same. I nodded to Olivia, my new assistant, to play a short video. The large screen behind the stage lit up with images of our first art therapy sessions. Ava painting with both hands, Clara beaming beside her pottery wheel, a 10-year-old girl finishing her first oil painting, a handprint of her mother's hand. Then the screen faded into a line of text. Kindness isn't weakness. It's a revolution in slow motion. Applause broke out. I didn't cry. But I smiled, fully, without effort. Someone stood from the crowd, Clara, stepping up to the podium to speak. She shared about her first evening here, how she had believed she was too old, too spent, nothing left to revive. Then she said a sentence that nearly brought me to tears. Delilah never asked us to be strong. She just showed us that here, even our weakness has a rightful seat. After her came Ava, then Mia, and then a young woman I'd never seen before. She introduced herself as someone who'd gone to high school with me. She said she remembered seeing me silenced in the middle of the schoolyard, that she had once wanted to step in but didn't out of fear. She said, I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to say that your presence today taught me how to stand up for what's right, even if it's late. I stood there, surrounded by voices flowing together like small rivers merging into the sea. I was no longer the daughter constantly compared, scolded for being too soft. I was the one who turned that softness into something that nurtured an entirely new community. At the end of the evening, a representative from the State Cultural Council stepped onto the stage. In her hands was a wooden plaque engraved with, Delilah Foster, the one who broke the cycle. I accepted the plaque, holding it as if cradling something that had once been denied. There were no tears. No words caught in my throat. Just a quiet joy, steady and deep, like a song without a climax but still able to stir every heartbeat. I gave a small bow, then looked up, my eyes scanning the back row, where I had reserved an empty seat just in case my mother came. That seat remained empty. I turned back, the microphone still on, my voice gentle as if speaking to one person alone. I used to be afraid to show up. But today I don't need to be welcomed. I already belong here. Then I stepped back, letting the light fall on the faces of the women behind me. Women who had once been told not to speak, not to cry, not to believe they were worthy. And now they were speaking, for an entire generation that had once been silenced. That morning began like any other. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, casting soft streaks across the wall like golden threads. I had just finished steeping a pot of mint tea when Olivia knocked lightly on the office door, her voice quiet. Someone left a letter at the gate. I didn't rush out. I poured the tea, sat down in the wooden armchair near the window, watching the pine trees still laced with mist. There was something in Olivia's eyes that told me. When the teapot was still half full, I slipped on my coat and walked to the main gate. On the stone bench near the entrance sat an envelope, neatly placed. Heavy paper, trimmed with a soft silver border, the kind my mother always used for family invitations or Christmas cards. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Slanted, even, clean, as if each stroke had been carefully measured. I stood there for a long time, fingertips resting on the edge of the envelope without opening it. The sky above was clear, only the sound of birds calling from the pine forest far away. Eventually, I picked up the letter, went back inside, and opened it at my old desk in the studio. I know you might not read this. And if you do, you might not believe it. But I'm writing anyway. Not to justify. Just to be honest, for once after years of living in layers. My first daughter's name was Elise. I froze. She only lived for 11 days. I was 29 then, rushed to the hospital after my water broke too early, panicked and exhausted. Elise was born premature, her lungs weak. The doctors said there was hope, but I didn't go into the NICU on the third day. Couldn't. I was too scared, too lost, too far inside my own fear to believe I deserved to be anyone's mother. Since the day she died, I became colder, stronger, or at least pretended to be. I built walls around myself, and when you were born, I couldn't take them down. I taught you silence because I feared the sound of crying. I taught you endurance because I thought it was the only way to survive. And I was wrong. If someday you want, I'll tell you about Elise. About what happened. About the fear I never dared to name. The letter wasn't signed. Only one line at the end. I'll be sitting by the gate every Thursday morning if one day you're ready. I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box on my desk, among half-finished sketches and plans for the new ceramic studio. No overwhelming emotion came over me. No tears. No blame. Just a quiet space opening up, still as a lake after the rain. I didn't reply. I didn't write back. I didn't go to the gate that Thursday. But the next morning, I placed a small wooden chair on the back porch, next to the lavender bushes. I laid a cream linen cloth across the table, set out a warm pot of tea and 2 porcelain cups. No note. No sign. Just a simple gesture, as if to say, if you're ready to be kind, I'll be here to listen. That afternoon, when I came out to clear the table, the teapot was half empty. The cup on the right held a faint lip print. No one had rung the bell. No message was left. But a daffodil stem had been placed gently at the edge of the table. I sat down in the remaining chair, fingertips resting on the rim of the untouched cup. A breeze drifted through, the scent of flowers mixing with warm mint, like an unnamed emotion that had lingered in my chest for a lifetime. No one needed to say, I'm sorry. And no one needed immediate forgiveness. All I knew was, in that moment, something had changed. Not because the door opened, but because I no longer stood in front of it with a closed heart. I looked up at the sky, where the last light of day softened through the leaves. A few fresh leaves floated gently onto the tea table, like messages that didn't need to be written. I touched the worn grain of the wooden surface, a quiet thought rising inside me. I don't need to win against them. I just need to stop losing to myself. What would you do if one day your mother left you a letter? Not to ask for forgiveness, but to open a door that never existed between you before? Would you take a seat, or walk on carrying silence like armor? I don't have the right answer for everyone. But I chose to put that armor down, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Family isn't always a place of warmth. But sometimes one small moment, a handwritten letter, a quiet pot of tea, can plant hope again in cracks we thought had turned to stone. If this story stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt like the unwanted one? Have you ever chosen to forgive, not to reconcile, but to set yourself free? Don't forget to follow the channel for more real, heartfelt, and deeply human stories about family, quiet pain, and those moments when we learn how to rise from just a single act of kindness. Because sometimes what changes an entire life isn't a battle, It's a small chair and a warm teapot waiting for someone outside to step in.